I would like to ask a question. Like a week ago, we had a meeting here, and I remember Dr. Sanchez when he said that every time he goes to work with teachers, and he asks, how many of you are constructivists? And, and everybody, you know, yeah, feels, you know, and they say they are constructivist teachers. But every time they get into the classroom, Skinner possesses his, you know, their soul, yes. And they become, you know, behaviorists. In terms of design, learning design, and we're still using the old term instructional design. We have to change that. But in terms of learning design, what are the differences? How does connectivism differs from, or differentiates, right, from constructivism and these other, you know, philosophies and theories? Yeah. I mean, what does it make? What does make the difference in terms of learning design? In terms of design.
Well, I think several things are critical, and it's part of it. It will make more sense, I believe, as we go forward, because you know, when you have a point of departure, the points are still close together, right? But as time goes on and, you know, things move further apart, I think where you're going to see some interest in terms of connectivism, where it'll start to make more sense for a lot of individuals, is where we have enough tools and technologies that enable us to understand what learners are doing and why are they doing it. How are they connecting concepts? Which pieces are they bringing together and which pieces aren't they bringing together? If you have a group of 10 students in a course and you find that, wow, you know, each time in the courses we've run, and let's say Jane is in this course, everyone who's connected to Jane, statistically at least, seems to have a higher grade than other students. What is it about Jane's interaction with people that influences their grade? How is she able to communicate with them? So I think the key assertion within connectivism is that knowledge is distributed, and that learning then is a function of growing and pruning our networks. And so basically it's a connection focus. I've suggested, and I think Stephen more or less agrees with this, that we can explain the learning process through connections from one end to the other end, right from the point of the biological point of neurons firing in your head, which mimics network attributes or reflects network attributes, right down to power laws and small worlds, at least in the cerebral cortex. And we can move through to the same idea to express concepts. Concepts are networked and connected. And if we haven't brought one concept into relation to another concept, we may have a knowledge deficiency on that area. And certain people also have what you would, well, all of us I think do have what you would call power laws, which means you have certain concepts that connect to everything else. Let's say you have a liberal or a conservative view politically. That's a power node that may impact all of your other concepts, the ones that you choose to connect and don't connect. So again, I'm using the connection metaphor conceptually. I can also describe that from a social perspective, right? If I connect with you, or if I connect to someone else, or if I connect to a data source or an information source, it's all a connection-driven process. And by understanding the connections, we're understanding the learning that's happening. That's the base idea. Now, what does it look like if we start to build on that? If we accept that, what kinds of things do we start to do differently? Well, first of all, we recognize, I think, the value of creativity and making things explicit. When we make something explicit, it can be analyzed. It can be crunched, it can be data mined years down the road, and you may find, surprisingly, that there is a strong correlation between this topic and this topic over here that I simply wasn't aware of. You also make the information that you possess accessible for analysis in other systems. What I mean by that is, let's say I type an email, send it off 3 months ago, Now today, I have a similar concept that arises. I begin typing out my email. The system that I'm involved in recognizes a relationship, a conceptual relationship between what I'm typing in my email now and what I typed 3 months ago, and begins to recommend resources for me, or says, hey, you said this to this and this. Or if it's a network level, like a system-wide or corporation-wide phenomena, it would actually put me in touch with other people in the organization who have similar patterns of discourse as well. Now, obviously, that can be quite disarming, scary in some levels, but essentially what the perspective is, by making our ideas explicit, we're making them available to connections that we can't anticipate. And those connections then can be analyzed, and they can then be customized or used to deliver personalized learning. I had a chat this afternoon with a group where we're looking at, why is it that we have one syllabus for 30 students when we know that all 30 students have a hugely different knowledge base, completely different perspective of thinking, the different experiences in their lives? It's almost impossible to say this syllabus will fit 30 students. The reality is we need 30 of those. You need 30 syllabi if you want to have a chance of really properly teaching 30 people. If you are starting to analyze the attributes of students and their interactions online, and you're starting to personalize and provide adaptive resources and interventions if you recognize a student is potentially failing, I think that's where you're starting to use a connectivism model more meaningfully. I don't know how a constructivist would explain that particular process or some of those processes that are involved around it. And one of the difficulties is that constructivism, and others have said this, and I think it's partly true, it's more a philosophy, right? It's more a sort of a perspective than something more specific. Thank you. So I think that's one of the difficulties that arises with it, is before we can talk constructivism, it's always nice to define which version are you talking about. Like David Jellin's article where he looks sort of at the 6 major views of constructivism under those elements. It's such a broad umbrella. So I can't really speak from a constructivism and what would that look like, but I can tell you what it looks like from a connectivist perspective and leave it to constructivists to argue where it departs from their vision. All right, well, let's...
I just wanted to...
Sure.
Talking about theories. The more I hear about connectivism, the more I read about it, the closer, or the more it reminds me of Gregory Bateson. Sorry, one second. The more it reminds me of Gregory Bateson in Palo Alto School of steps in the ecology of mind, and some of the words you're using, it just resonates. I feel I'm doing connectivism as you speak, because it just brings to mind all these things that I've already read, but it resonates a lot.
Yeah. Well, and first of all, there's a few things that I find interesting. One is the word resonate, because people, especially from a constructivist stance, the view typically is shared understanding. And I don't think shared understanding even exists. I don't know how in the world we can share understanding. But resonates, that makes sense, right? To me, when you say resonates, because I think it's a network concept, right? And it gets back a little bit to this adjacent possible concept, right? If you have a certain base of knowledge, the base of knowledge you have means there's certain elements of knowledge that are now accessible to you. But if something is 3 layers removed, it might be very tough for you to be able to connect to it, or for me or anyone else to connect to it. So I think that's a reality as well. From a network concept, resonance is a concept of learning that I would describe that relates to understanding. I mean, you say something and I form connections in my head, and it's like, wow, yes, those pieces all fit together. So I just want to emphasize I like your choice of words. The next point is Bateson and this, sort of I think it's important to emphasize that we've always learned in social networked ways. Right back down to hunter-gatherer days, to farming, early agricultural society where the expertise of a father or a parent was passed down to a child. We've always learned in social networks. But I think what's happening today is a few things make it a little bit more explicit. One is the tools that we have at our disposal make the networks explicit. You can see on Facebook who you're connected to, so we're all using the language of networks more intentionally than we did. The interaction, you look back at 1972 or 73 when Granovetter did his paper on the strength of weak ties. He was talking about tie strength then. You go back further, into some of the Lazarsfeld, I think it was in 1940s, I believe, where he made a statement, who talks to whom about what and to what effect. Well, that's still a brilliant metaphor, a brilliant task, I think, for education to be able to do. Which students talk to each other, what do they talk about, and what's the effect of that? In my eyes, that's a network learning kind of a concept. So I guess I just want to emphasize that a lot of times it's not that you have, let's say, a completely new idea, but you have a reconfiguration of existing ideas. And that's, if you're familiar with the work of Brian Arthur, who talks about the nature of technology, if you've read Thomas Kuhn's work, or more recently Johnson's work, that's essentially what they're saying. Innovation is novel connections. It's not necessarily bringing something, it's very rare that something completely new comes into existence. Almost always it's a reconfiguration of existing elements in a particular way that for that particular time resonates with a group of people. Over time, something comes along and replaces or enlarges or whatever else.
Okay, this question comes from Dr. Mario Núñez via Twitter, and it says, what are the political implications of connectivism?
I haven't thought about it at length, I could say, from a political perspective, but I think there is an emphasis, first of all, on openness. In order to ensure optimum connectedness or possibility for connections, you do need openness, and you need some kind of a democratic structure that's in place. Now, by the same account, and if you look at the work of Beinhocker, where he sort of looks at the the nature of wealth and how it's changed, in a text he did in 2006, he also emphasizes that there is such a thing as too much connectedness. Right? Too much connectedness can actually begin paralysis. Or if you have a system that's too tightly structured, it's not safe from cascades. If one part of the system breaks, it cascades all the way through, and then you have like the electricity grid that's failed periodically because it's too tightly structured. So I think from a political perspective, you want openness, you want transparency, and certainly open government and transparent government, I think, are part of it. Politically, though, I think it's very healthy for a society to have a large percentage of the population that's educated. It's healthy for preserving a quality of life. I would also say fairness, justice, democracy. So I think the political implications of individuals being able to access a broad range of ideas are significantly valuable. But does that mean that you should now vote for person X? I don't think so. But I think it does emphasize that we need a society that allows ideas to collide with each other. And if we close society down too much, we lose that prospect of innovation. And there are certainly illustrations in history where a society has decided to become closed and structured, and as a result, they've cut progress short, which meant that the world around them continued to innovate and advance technologically, and yet suddenly they were centuries behind neighbors that they were competing with now, but because they had advanced in so many aspects of society, they were at a significant disadvantage, intellectually, militarily, and other dimensions as well. So I think those are the negative dimensions of it, but beyond that, I would need to think more about the political dimension.